He never cheated on me. He just never chose me. I was always here. He never was. I used to believe that loyalty was enough, that if I stayed, supported him, respected his space, loved him in a constant and quiet way, one day he would look at me and think, "It's her. She's the one I want to be with." But reality doesn't reward patience when it's mistaken for availability. I wasn't explicitly ignored. I wasn't mistreated. I wasn't betrayed in the way everyone imagines betrayal. And maybe that's why it took me so long to understand what was really happening. He never cheated on me. He just never chose me. In public, he always walked half a step ahead. Not enough to seem rude, but enough to feel intentional. He didn't hold my hand unless I reached for his first. He didn't introduce me with pride. He didn't correct people when they assumed I was just a friend. And every time that quiet discomfort appeared, I convinced myself that the problem was me. He's more reserved. He doesn't like labels. He shows love in other ways. Women learn very early to translate absence as emotional depth, to call disinterest maturity, to accept crumbs as if they were complex gestures. He didn't flirt with other women in front of me. He didn't hide his phone. He didn't disappear without explanation. On the outside, he was irreproachable. On the inside, he was empty. He was with me, but never beside me. I was part of his life when it was convenient. I was there when he needed support, company, someone who believed in him more than he believed in himself. But when it came time to place me at the center, to commit, to defend, to choose, he always stepped back, always with an elegant justification. It's not the right moment. We don't need to rush things. Why do you need this now? As if wanting to be chosen were a whim, as if asking for clarity were too much, as if love without positioning were normal. I waited. I waited because he never said no, but he also never said yes, and that permanent maybe began to corrode something inside me. I was always available, always understanding, always seeing things from his perspective. But who was seeing mine? One day, during a casual conversation, someone asked, "So, what are you two?" He laughed, brushed it off, changed the subject. I smiled out of politeness, but inside, something broke. It wasn't a shock, it was erosion. That kind of pain that doesn't explode, it spreads slowly like ink in water. That night, lying beside him, I realized something that scared me. I felt lonely, even though I wasn't alone, and that hurts more than real loneliness. He slept peacefully, deep breathing, relaxed body. I stared at the ceiling, trying to remember when I started lowering my expectations just to avoid bothering him. When I accepted being an option to avoid the risk of rejection. The lamp cast shadows across the room, shadows that seemed larger than they were, just like the distance between us. There in the silence of that bedroom, a truth began to take shape, timid but impossible to ignore. Maybe the problem wasn't a lack of love, maybe it was a lack of choice. And being loved without being chosen is one of the quietest forms of betrayal that exists. Always available, never a priority. It wasn't one big event that woke me up. It was repetition, the way everything always seemed to revolve around him, and I orbited patiently, understanding, waiting for the moment he would finally pull me into the center. I was always there. When he had a bad day, I listened. When he doubted himself, I believed for both of us. When he needed company, I adjusted my schedule. When he wanted silence, I respected it. I was flexible. Too flexible, but when I needed something, he was tired. The day had been long. The moment wasn't good. We'll talk later. And that later never came. I started to notice that I was only a priority when I wasn't competing with anything. If friends invited him out, I understood. If a work opportunity came up, I supported him. If he needed space, I respected it. But when I asked for something simple, presence, clarity, a defined place, the conversation always turned into an inconvenience. Why are you pressuring me? You're creating problems where there are none. Things are fine the way they are. Just for whom? I wanted to ask, but I stayed quiet, because women learn that asking too many questions might make love disappear. There was one weekend that marked everything. I had been invited to an important family event of his, nothing grand, a simple lunch. I felt happy, not because of the event, but because of the gesture. The day before, he told me, almost without emotion, "Oh, I don't think you'll be able to come tomorrow." "Why?" I asked. "It'll be kind of confusing to explain." Confusing. I understood exactly what that meant. It wasn't confusing for him. It was uncomfortable. Introducing me, answering questions, taking a stand. I smiled as someone who accepts. It's okay. But inside, something rearranged itself. The next day, he left early, gave me a quick kiss and said, "We'll do something later." Later. Again. I spent that Sunday alone, not sad, thoughtful. I sat on the balcony with a cup of coffee that went cold as I stared at nothing. The day was sunny, full of life outside, but inside me, something was beginning to calm. Not sadness, but a strange clarity. I began to mentally list all the times I had been postponed. After work calms down, after he figures his life out, after he feels more certain, after the timing is right. And I realized something painful. The right moment never arrives for someone who is not a priority. That night, when he came back excited, telling stories, laughing at jokes I hadn't heard, I listened in silence. He was light, happy, relaxed. I was distant. He noticed. "You're acting strange." Strange. Always that word when a woman starts to see clearly. "No," I said, "I'm just thinking." Thinking about what? I thought about telling the truth. I thought about saying I was tired of always being understanding, tired of fitting where there was no space for me. But once again, I stayed quiet, and that silence wasn't submission. It was awareness being born. That week, something changed in me. I stopped adjusting myself so much, not out of spite, out of exhaustion. If he couldn't see me, I would stop hiding. If he couldn't choose me, I would start observing myself. And that's when I realized something even harder. I was investing in a relationship where the risk was entirely mine, and the comfort was entirely his. He had companionship, support, affection. I had doubt. And living in constant doubt is a slow way of losing yourself. That night, lying beside him once again, I felt something cut through me like an unavoidable whisper. I wasn't waiting for love. I was waiting for courage, and maybe he had never had it. I wasn't difficult, I was just asking for the bare minimum. It took me a long time to understand this because I spent too much time believing the opposite, that I asked for too much, that I felt too much, that I needed too much. He never said it directly, but he implied it. Every time I brought up us, he sighed. Every time I asked where we were going, he deflected. Every time I talked about the future, he responded with silence or light irony. You think too much. Why do you complicate everything? Things are good the way they are. Good for him. For me, they were confusing, and constant confusion is not neutral. It is erosion. I began to notice how he reacted when other people talked about commitment, about marriages, plans, decisions. He always joked, always relativized, always placed himself above the situation, as if commitment were an emotional weakness he was too intelligent to fall into. And I I stayed there, trying not to be the woman who pressures. The problem is that little by little, I erased myself so I wouldn't bother him. I measured my words. I held back questions. I swallowed my desires. Not because I agreed, but because I was afraid of the answer. Afraid of hearing something definitive. Afraid of confirming what I already felt. One day, in an apparently silly conversation, someone commented, "You two make a beautiful couple." He smiled politely and replied, "We get along well." He didn't say couple. He didn't say together. He didn't say us. I laughed too, but inside something cracked with enough delicacy not to make a sound and deep enough to leave a mark. That night, I cried alone in the bathroom, not out of despair, out of exhaustion. I sat on the cold floor, back against the door, trying to muffle the sound. Not because he would care, but because I no longer wanted to have to explain why something that should be simple, being chosen, hurt so much. I was tired of trying to be less in order to fit. That was the moment something shifted inside me. I started asking questions, not to him, to myself. Why was I accepting so little? Why was I negotiating the basics? When did wanting to be chosen become too much? The answer came with painful clarity. I was trying to make things easy for someone who never intended to commit to me, and there is no right way to convince someone to choose you. Either they choose you, or they don't. In the days that followed, I started observing my own reactions. When he postponed something important to me, I felt a knot in my chest and pretended I didn't. When he avoided plans, I smiled and swallowed frustration. When he always put himself first, I justified it. And that constant self-justification began to exhaust me more than any argument ever could. One day I gathered the courage and said carefully, "Sometimes I feel like you never put me first." He laughed softly, not cruelly, with surprise. "You're exaggerating, exaggerating." That word carries a cruel weight when said to a woman who is only trying to be honest. "I'm here with you, aren't I?" he added, being there, as if physical presence were the same as emotional choice. In that moment, I understood something that changed everything. He confused companionship with commitment. And I accepted that confusion because I was afraid of being alone. But the truth is simple and harsh. I already was. That night, lying beside him once again, I didn't cry. For the first time, I felt anger, not toward him, toward myself, for having diminished myself, for having accepted emotional crumbs disguised as maturity. And that anger didn't destroy me, it woke me up. Because when a woman understands that she is not asking for too much, she is simply asking for the minimum. She stops begging, and she starts deciding. The day I stopped justifying myself, silence began to become my ally. In the days that followed, I noticed something curious about myself. I stopped trying to explain everything. Before, I lived justifying myself, trying to show him that I was being reasonable, trying to explain why I wanted more, trying to convince him that I was enough, that I deserved more than silence or vague answers. But one day, patience ran out. I found myself in yet another conversation with him, trying again, trying to justify my needs, my feelings. He was on the couch, staring at his phone, scrolling without commitment. The glow of the screen lit his face with that cold, bluish light. I began to speak as usual, trying to understand why the relationship felt so stagnant, why he never seemed truly present. "Why don't you claim me as your partner? Why don't you put me first? I'm here, trying, always. I just need you to show me that you chose me." He didn't answer right away. And somehow that already said more than anything else. The sound of the TV in the background, the ticking of the clock, the heavy silence between us. When he finally spoke, it was with a mix of impatience and frustration. "You're always demanding something, always expecting more. This won't work if you keep going like this." And there, in that moment, the shift happened. It wasn't a dramatic outburst or a big fight. It was a simple internal click. I stopped trying to justify myself. "I'm not demanding," I said calmly. "I'm asking for what I deserve." He looked at me as if, for the first time in years, he had been caught off guard. Not by what I said, but by the fact that I was no longer begging for change. He tried to speak again, but I interrupted him, not with anger, but with something far more powerful. "I don't need you to tell me you love me anymore. I need you to show me that you chose to be here." And that was the last time I made myself available without being chosen. The empty air. In the days that followed, he tried. He tried to be more present, more affectionate. He sent messages during the day, asked how I was, suggested dinner. But there was a difference. It wasn't his effort that was changing things anymore. It was the way I looked at it. I was no longer waiting. I was no longer asking. I was no longer justifying myself to him. And that was it. The lack of explanations, the absence of demands. That was what frightened him more than anything else. He felt it. The space I created, the distance that wasn't meant to punish him, but to protect me. I wasn't being cold. I was being clear. And clarity, for someone who has always lived comfortably in ambiguity, is terrifying. When he came home on the fourth day without reaching out, without calling, and saw a suitcase packed beside the bed, he stopped in the doorway. "What's going on?" he asked, his eyes visibly uneasy. I looked at him, not with anger, not with disdain, just with clarity. "I'm not waiting anymore. I don't need this." I knew in that moment that the biggest mistake I could make was continuing to give chances to someone who had never chosen me. I was tired of being the option he chose when everything else in his life was in order. I was tired of being the woman he only remembered when he needed something. The wind of release. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. He already knew. He knew I was no longer there to validate his presence in my life. He knew he had lost something he never understood how to keep. I finished packing my suitcase with a calm that surprised even me, for someone who was ending a story. I folded my clothes carefully, took only what was mine, left behind everything that represented us, because it had never truly existed. And without looking back, I closed the door with the certainty that I had finally made the right choice for myself. He could have chosen me. He could have been clear. He could have claimed me in every sense. But instead, he chose to let me go. Not with words, but with omissions. And in the end, his omissions said more than any "I love you" he could have ever said when he tries to come back. There's an almost predictable pattern when someone realizes they've lost control of a situation they always considered safe. They try to come back, not because they truly understood, but because they miss the comfort. The first days after I left were silent. No messages, no calls. I knew he was trying to figure out whether this was definitive or just another one of my quiet pauses, the kind that always ended with me coming back. But this time I didn't. On the fourth day, my phone rang. "We need to talk," he said with a tone that mixed urgency and false calm. I took a deep breath before answering. "About what?" "About us." Us. The word he had always avoided now sounded far too comfortable in his mouth. We agreed to meet for coffee. Neutral place. Public. Safe. I knew exactly why. He needed a setting to look reasonable. When I arrived, he was already there. Tired eyes, restless posture. He kept folding and unfolding a napkin without realizing it. He didn't look remorseful, He looked destabilized. "You went too far," he began, trying to keep control of the conversation. "Too far." "I went as far as I could without losing myself," I replied calmly. He frowned. "You left without giving me a chance to change." I looked at him for a few seconds. The noise of the cafe around us, people laughing, life moving forward. You had time, you had signs, you had conversations, you had silence, you had everything. He looked away. "I just needed more time." Time, the favorite word of those who don't intend to decide. "Time is not a promise," I replied. "It's postponement." He sighed, rubbing his face. "I was always with you." "You were always nearby," I corrected. "Never beside me." That hit him harder than any accusation. He fell silent for a few seconds, as if processing something that had always been obvious, but he had never wanted to see. "You're exaggerating," he tried again, almost by reflex. I smiled, not ironically, with clarity. Exaggeration is calling crumbs a meal. Silence. For the first time, he had no ready answer. "I love you," he said as a last resort. That phrase, it always shows up when all the others fail. "Love without choice doesn't sustain anyone," I replied. "I had to choose myself because you never did." He looked at me like someone who had finally realized something that had always been there. "So that's it?" he asked, his voice lower. "You're gonna throw everything away?" "Throw it away." "No," I said. I stopped throwing myself away. We stayed there a little longer, talking about small, irrelevant things, like strangers who share an unresolved past. When we stood up, he tried to touch my hand. I stepped back, not coldly, with boundaries. "Take care of yourself," I said. He nodded, and in that moment I knew he was still trying to understand what he had lost. I was already understanding what I had gained. As I left the cafe, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: lightness. Because when someone tries to come back too late, it's not a sign of love. It's a sign of interrupted habit. And I was no longer a habit. The kind of loneliness that doesn't hurt. In the first few days, loneliness arrived quietly, not as a punishment, but as space. A space that felt too silent for someone who had spent years adjusting to another person's rhythm. A space that at first seemed too large, until I realized it only felt large because I had lived so small for so long. Waking up alone didn't hurt. What hurt was remembering how accustomed I had become to waking up accompanied and still feeling alone. Now, at least, loneliness was honest. I didn't have to decode silences. I didn't have to measure words. I didn't have to wait for answers that never came. I began reorganizing my routine without asking permission. I chose my own hours. I made plans. I said no without guilt. And for the first time, I noticed something curious. No one got angry with me because of it. Life went on. In the early days, I felt the urge to tell him small things, a silly detail, an observation from the day, something that made me laugh. The habit was still there. My finger hovered over his name on my phone. But I didn't give in, because I knew missing someone is not the same as wanting them back. I started going out alone, not to prove anything, to experience. A coffee on a random afternoon, a walk with no destination, a movie in the middle of the week. Simple things, mine. And with each small choice, something rebuilt itself inside me. I wasn't healing from a visible trauma. I was recovering from a constant absence. That's the part almost no one understands. Relationships like mine don't end with explosions. They end with exhaustion. Exhaustion from waiting, exhaustion from explaining, exhaustion from feeling like too much. One day, while organizing old things, I found a photo of us. The two of us smiling, arms intertwined. I looked happy, but when I looked closely, I noticed something in my eyes, a kind of tired hope. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel nostalgia. I felt distance. And emotional distance is a clear sign that something ended inside long before it ended on the outside. That night, I realized something that brought me peace. I didn't feel like going back. I felt like moving forward, and that changes everything. He still appeared sometimes. A short message, a subtle reaction on social media, a "hope you're doing well." I was, but I didn't reply. Not out of pride, out of coherence, because replying would open a door I had already closed consciously. And awareness weighs less than empty hope. Little by little, loneliness stopped being a presence. It became background. I no longer thought of him when I woke up. I no longer wondered if he was okay. I no longer rehearsed imaginary conversations, and that inner silence was liberating. I began to notice small changes, the way I smiled more easily, the way I didn't check my phone every 5 minutes, the way I made plans without fear of being interrupted. I was coming back, not to who I was before him, but to who I should have always been. That's when I realized I hadn't lost someone. I had stopped losing myself every single day. And when that happens, loneliness stops being fear. It becomes a starting point. The reunion that confirmed everything. I wasn't expecting to run into him. These reunions don't announce themselves. They simply happen when you're no longer searching for answers. It was an ordinary afternoon, a neutral place. People passing by, parallel conversations, life moving on without ceremony. I was calm, focused on something simple when I felt that silent recognition even before I looked. He was there, thinner, a little more tired, with that expression of someone who lost something, but still doesn't know exactly what it was. For a second, I considered pretending I hadn't seen him, not out of fear, out of indifference, but he saw me first. "Hi." His voice came out low, overly careful. "Hi." That was all. No impact, no tightness in my chest, no strange acceleration, just politeness. We talked like people who share a story that no longer hurts. Generic questions, brief answers, that uncomfortable formality of those who were once too intimate to be strangers and too distant to be close. "You're different," he said, not as a compliment, as an observation. "I'm at peace," I replied. He nodded, as if that explained everything. We stood there in silence for a few seconds. Not the heavy silence from before, a new silence, final. I noticed details that used to go unnoticed, the way he avoided my eyes, the way he fidgeted with his hands, signs of discomfort that I had always interpreted as, "He's just reserved." Now I saw clearly it wasn't reserve, it was deliberate distance. "I thought a lot after you left," he said finally. "Maybe I waited too long. Maybe." The word that had always followed everything between us. "Maybe," I agreed. "But some choices don't wait." He took a deep breath. "I never wanted to lose you." And there it was. The sentence that months earlier would have undone me. Now it simply passed. "I know," I answered honestly. "But you also never wanted to choose me." He lowered his eyes. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He didn't try to flip the narrative. Because in that moment there was no longer a dispute over truth. The truth had already been spoken. We said goodbye with a brief hug. Respectful. Final. As I walked away, I realized something that confirmed everything. I didn't look back. Not because it hurt, but because it no longer made sense. I walked down the street with steady steps. The afternoon sun bathed everything in that golden end-of-day light. People rushed past, each in their own story, and I, for the first time in a long while, felt like I was part of my own. That day, as I continued on my way, I understood with absolute clarity. I wasn't abandoned. I withdrew myself. And there is an immense difference between the two. To be abandoned is to be left behind. To withdraw is to choose not to remain where you were never chosen. And that choice is liberating. When I chose myself. Some stories don't end with reconciliation. They end with understanding. And understanding came to me on an ordinary day, without dramatic music, without final speeches. It came when I realized my life felt lighter and nothing was missing. I no longer felt the need to explain who I was. I didn't need to prove my worth. I didn't need to wait for someone else to decide. I started making plans without asking permission from the past. I changed small habits. I took different paths. I discovered new places, not to fill a void, but to honor a space that was finally mine. And it was in this quiet process that I understood something essential. I wasn't needy. I was poorly accompanied. There's a huge difference between being alone and feeling alone. And I had already lived the worst version of it, being with someone who never truly chose me. I began to notice small things that once went unnoticed. The way I smiled when I woke up, the lightness of not needing to check my phone anxiously, the simple pleasure of drinking coffee without rushing, without waiting for someone who always arrived late, not late on the clock, late in intention. I reconnected with friends I had neglected. I returned to hobbies I had abandoned. I discovered new interests. And with each of these small reconquests, I found myself again. Today, when I think about everything I lived through, I don't feel anger. I feel clarity. He wasn't a villain. He was a man too comfortable with not deciding. And I was a woman too patient in waiting. There was no explicit betrayal. There was no other woman. There was no scandal. But there was something just as destructive. Omission, lack of positioning, silence where there should have been choice. And that too is betrayal. Because loving someone is not keeping them close. It's standing beside them. With time, I learned that being chosen starts before any relationship. It begins when you decide not to accept less than you deserve, when you stop negotiating the basics, when you understand that love doesn't need to be begged for. I learned that there is a difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is empty. Solitude is whole. Loneliness weighs you down. Solitude sets you free. And I was finally in solitude, complete, conscious, and at peace with myself. One day, months later, a friend asked if I didn't miss him. I stopped to think, truly think. I miss who I thought he was, I answered, not who he actually was. And that distinction changes everything. Because when you stop loving a projection and face reality, grief becomes simpler. You don't lose someone real, you wake up from an illusion. Today, when I pass couples on the street, I no longer feel that tightness in my chest. I don't feel envy. I don't feel longing. I feel curiosity about my own story, about who I will still become, about what I will still create, about who will truly choose me when I'm ready to be chosen again. Because now I know I didn't lose someone who never chose me. I gained myself, whole, conscious, and at peace. And this victory doesn't make noise, it doesn't need to. It is felt in the way you wake up without weight on your chest, in the way you make decisions without fear, in the way you look in the mirror and recognize who is there. I chose myself, and that was the best decision I ever made. Final reflection. Maybe this story isn't just mine. Maybe you are living something similar, not a visible betrayal, but a constant absence. A relationship where you love, wait, understand, but are never truly chosen. Sometimes it's not a lack of love, it's a lack of positioning. And that hurts because it leaves no obvious marks. It hurts slowly, silently. If you have to lower your expectations to avoid being a burden, if you have to accept doubt so you don't lose someone, if you have to constantly adjust yourself just to fit, maybe it's not love, maybe it's just waiting. And waiting too long for someone who never decides is also a way of losing yourself. Choosing yourself is not selfish, it's emotional survival. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to Stories We Tell, leave a like, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us keep creating stories about love, self-respect, and second chances, because stories that touch the heart deserve to be told and remembered. Thank you for being here.